Queensland. There's more than 7% of the vote counted in Queensland. That's some interesting numbers.
Well, the count is much further progressed in Queensland. The Labor Party had one of its worst ever results in Queensland in the last election.
2 out of 27.
That's right. And so, 35.8 is a pretty awful vote. But that's corrected for Booths. If you look at the swing figures, One Nation got 16.8. Labor Party votes barely trickled up. If the Labor Party wins seats in Queensland, it's because the votes of Liberals and National Party voters have gone to One Nation and on to Labor as preferences. So this is a very tricky election to call.
Okay. Sorry, Barry.
I think in New South Wales, of course, we've been saying all along that Labor had to break that logjam in New South Wales. And in fact, at the moment, they're trailing in seats like Parramatta, Robertson, Macquarie, Hughes, Eden, Monero, doing a little better in Patterson and Lindsay. But at this stage, it doesn't look as if they're going to get that bagful that they needed, which means they'll be looking for a blowout somewhere else.
Okay, Bob McMullen. They're not great figures.
Oh, well, if they're showing it's just showing a national swing of 5.1%. If we get a national swing of 5.1%, we'll win the election. I'm not saying that we are going to get it, but that's not what a two-party preferred vote of 51.5 is not based on which you lose the election.
Yeah, although your danger is the issue of how much of that gets recorded in safe Labor seats.
Well, I know that has been a very significant rewriting of history. If you got 51.5% of the vote on fair boundaries and didn't win, I have to say that's a pretty heroic set of assumptions to get to that. I'm not saying we will get 51.5. There's a lot of water to flow under that bridge, but if we do, I think we'll win.
There's a distortion here, Kerry, I think, because of this. The figures in Queensland do show at the moment the big swings of Labor that's distorting the national figure, I think, at this stage. I think the interesting thing is that Labor's just not making any ground up in New South Wales.
Okay, well, actually, on the tally room floor, we've got the ABC's political correspondent, Jim Middleton, standing by with the National Party leader in the Senate, Senator Ron Boswell, who I'm sure has got some interesting things to say about what's happening with the Nationals and One Nation. Jim Middleton?
Absolutely, Kerry. Senator Boswell, of course, is the main National Party number cruncher. And before we go to the general picture of the National Party across the country, what are you hearing about the question a lot of people are very interested in, Pauline Hanson in Blair?
Well, Pauline Hanson in Blair has 44% of the vote on our calculations. These are early figures. If that is maintained, she will win the seat, but it looks as though it's the only seat that she will win.
What about the seat of Wide Bay, where I think the last I heard, One Nation was polling 38%?
No, the National Party's going like a German band in Wide Bay. We're looking pretty safe there. I don't think that's going to be a problem to us.
And what about the One Nation challenge across the west of Queensland as far as the Nationals are concerned? What about Groom, for example?
No, it looks as though we're going to win Groom. On these are early figures, and we've got our nose in front in Groom. Very good candidate, Bruce Green there, campaigned very well. It seems if we get in front there, and we've got the Labor Party preference and the Green preferences and the Democrat preferences, he looks to be all right. But again, I say that this is very early figures.
Okay, now, so you think you might pick up Groom, which would be a net win. What's the situation, say, in Larry Anthony's seat in New South Wales, and also in Hume, which is where John Sharp retired?
Well, Hume is looking very poor, and I think we've got to say that that'll be very difficult to win from here. The other one, Larry is tight. Larry is tight, but we think he'll come home.
So it is just conceivable there that Neville Newell could regain it for the Labor Party. Is that right?
It's conceivable, but we think we've got our nose in front there. We're confident Larry has campaigned well, done all his postal voting well. He's been around the ridges a long time with his father, and they're good campaigners.
Okay, just one very quick question before I let you go, Senator Boswell. How difficult has campaigning with the Telstra sale hanging over the National Party been in the bush?
It hasn't been a real issue out in the bush. It's not a thing that's come up continually. Right out in the bush, I think our people will stick to us out there. But it's been a difficult campaign. It's been a hard campaign.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Boswell. So there you have it, Kerry. It looks like the Nationals believe that they will basically end up about even Stevens at the end of the night.
Thanks, Jim. But from what Ron Boswell's saying, I think it's probably good to take a look at Blair, where Pauline Hanson is contesting that new seat. The expectation had been that the Liberal Party would take this, but in fact Pauline Hanson is polling extremely well.
Well, I mean, there's quite a spray of votes here. As you can see, Pauline Hanson is currently leading the poll. ahead of the Labor Party, with the Liberals third and the Nationals fourth. I think it's easy to explain this graphic if you look at the percentages. There's 16.5% counted. You've got the One Nation on 40, Labor 23, Nationals 10, Liberals 20. Now, on those figures, One Nation are probably not close enough to win that seat. It's rather hard to tell because you can't really compare Hanson's vote with last time because she really wasn't standing for One Nation, and it is an extremely diverse electorate and was spread across 4 electorates last time, so it's a bit hard to be sure. But I would say if those figures continue, the Liberal will probably get over the line, but on Labor Party preferences. So I don't think there'll be enough leakage to One Nation to get over the line, but it'll be a long time. Our computer's just saying in doubt One Nation ahead at this stage.
But by the same token, Anthony, what these figures are telling us is that One Nation does seem to have beaten the pollsters once again, that people who are intending to vote One Nation in a number of instances haven't been signalling that in advance.
That's right.
But this vote's declining, Kerry. She was 45 on earlier screens. She's down to 40. I think the Liberal Party can win this seat.
Okay.
I think so too.
Yep. All right, let's go back to the seat of Hinkler. We've got Paul Neville, the sitting National. That's around Bundaberg and Gladstone.
Well, this looked like quite a safe National Party seat. It had a margin of over 8%, and Paul Neville is certainly leading it at the moment. But following the redistribution, it would have been a marginal Labor seat based on 1993 election figures. And you've got quite a vote for a variety of parties. Again, One Nation with 20% of the vote. We're factoring in our... we've actually got a preference count in this one. And after an actual preference count, it's showing a 9% swing. So I'm just trying to... I'm not exactly sure what that shows then as a distribution of preferences. But that is an actual preference count on 15 booths.
Okay.
And showing a 9% swing.
All right. Now, what about Lilly? That's another one that Labor pretty much has to win.
Oh,
Or
this is
certainly
a seat,
has to win.
This is a seat that Labor would have to win. And again, this is showing a trend which is existing in a number of electorates. Wayne Swan lost this seat to Elizabeth Grace at the last election. He's currently leading in the primary vote. There's a few good Labor booths early on, but if you look at that, he's ahead on the primary. You factor in the preferences, and you'll see the swing dial doesn't swing that far. So in other words, that's another marginal seat where the Labor Party is only getting a 3 to 4% swing, where you're seeing seats on 7 or 8%, which are swinging by 8 and 9%. That's why it's a difficult election to call, and perhaps maybe, as Newspoll pointed out, the swing is different in the marginals and across the whole country.
Okay, Anthony, can we jump down to Victoria now? And one of those seats that Labor was certainly hoping to win, that the coalition was very nervous about, that's the regional seat of Bendigo, a margin of 0.9% for the Liberals.
Well, when you see an electorate where you've got quite a spray of vote amongst minor parties, you always start to worry about preferences. There's no sitting Liberal. Bruce Reid has retired. Max Turner's the new Liberal. He's up against Steve Gibbons for the Labor Party. We've got a National Party candidate. We've got a One Nation candidate. Look at the percentages, because then you can add them up.
The order accused not
and you can see the Liberal and Labor are running neck and neck. That's quite a low primary vote for both parties. Now, we're going to factor in our preferences. 60% of One Nation to Labor. I think about 80% of the National Party votes to the Liberals. And comparing booths, we're showing a 4.5% swing, which is not as large as the swing that some people were suggesting was occurring in Victoria.
And again, Kerry, no improvement in the ALP primary vote at all. In fact, they've slipped back.
I think Nick might agree with me. This is looking rather somewhat similar to the South Australian election, when Labor Party did well because of preferences, but there was no rise in their vote.
But they did well.
Okay, well, we've actually got Max Turner, the Liberal candidate, standing by in Bendigo. I'll be very curious, Max, to hear how you're reading it and what your scrutineers are telling you.
Well, it's too early yet, Kerry. I've got no real reports in from the booths. I think Bendigo will be still standing around in a week's time seeing who's going to win.
What are the issues down there, apart from the GST? Is there one?
Kerry, the issues have been really GST and a scare campaign by Labor, and that's been very difficult to counteract. But we've run a good campaign, and if Bendigo stands true to the tradition, we'll be certainly standing around in a week's time.
Although the suggestion on the figures we've got here with a distribution of preferences is a swing of around 4% to Labor.
Well, that wouldn't be good if that's true, Kerry, but let's say wait and see. It's a bit early yet.
Okay, well, we may well be coming back to you later in the night, the way it looks. But, Max, thanks very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Okay, now, can we have a look back in New South Wales, that highly marginal Liberal seat of Patterson, 0.4%. What's happening there, Andrew?
Well, this is now starting to get interesting in this election. Bob Baldwin is ahead on the primary votes at this stage. We've got a smattering of votes, in fact.
Not by much.
I think we'll go through the percentages here because some of these additions of preferences and things start to get easier to explain. One Nation are polling about their state rural average there. Now, we now have a preference count in that electorate in 15 booths. Factor in booths and preferences, and it's showing a 2.5% swing. Now, the government spent a lot of time on Patterson, but it was always a very difficult seat for them to hold. Now, it's still saying too close to call, but Labor will be feeling a little bit better now than seeing an actual preference count in that electorate.
Well, once again, we've got Bob Baldwin, the sitting Liberal member, standing by. Bob Baldwin, you're on an absolute knife edge, but the figures here are suggesting that it's begun to move against you.
Well, it's very early in the count as yet, and I would see that, from what we understand, the mortgage belt has come towards the Howard government because they're frightened of interest rates going up under Beazley. Some of the other areas are going against us. But I think there's still a lot of vote to be counted that's absentee vote at the moment, Kerry.
OK, now, your party has put a lot of money behind you in this campaign. What was your feeling, what was the mood around the booths for you today?
Well, the mood today was very silent. There weren't people coming up with the great anger that they were going to cast a vote against the government. I think it's too early to call. I think that we'll be sitting this one out for a couple of weeks before we know.
Bob, if you're gone, will it have been the GST?
No, I think that we've fought a very hard campaign. People want the tax reform, but when you come in on the knife-edge seat, life is on the knife edge, and it's not over till the fat lady sings, and she hasn't started Ave Maria yet.
OK, well, perhaps we'll be coming back to you later when we've got a clearer picture. Bob Baldwin, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you, Kerry.
OK, now there's another very interesting seat in New South Wales, and that's the seat of Hughes in the southeast, with a very high-profile Labor candidate, our old boss, Anthony, David Hill, former head of the ABC, former head of Soccer Australia, but with a 4.9% margin that he's got to make up.
It's a quite diverse electorate. It includes the northern part of the Illawarra, new housing estates around Liverpool, and large parts of the Sutherland Shire. Darnell Valley is well ahead on those primary votes. It looks like there are a fair few good Liberal booths in that, because when we factor in the preferences, watch the swing, it's gone the wrong way for the Labor Party. So, kept you all in suspense there. So it looks like the Liberals will retain Hughes.
Well, there were a lot of mixed signals coming out of Hughes over the last week or so. Initially, it was sounding very doubtful for David Hill. There was that issue of whether the Sydney Water problems, and he was the chairman of Sydney Water for that time, there was the question of whether that was going to bite. But then in the last week, Bob McMullen, the signals coming from Labor, whether they were actually quite hopeful. It sounds like you've misread that one.
Well, I always thought Hughes was a very hard seat to win. It was never in my first 27. I don't mean we didn't try to win it. Of course, it was worth a big campaign. There's always a marginal seat. But if I tried to write 27 seats we were going to win, I have to say Hughes was never in my first 27.
Bob, how are you reading it overall?
We're about half an hour to an hour away from getting a pattern, Kerry. I mean, I just looked at some figures on the AEC screen that says we're leading in seats like Petrie in Queensland.
That's about an 8% swing.
Yes, that's right. We're getting about 10% there on those figures, and yet we might not be leading in some which require lesser swings. So I think at the moment...
It always threatened to be like this, didn't it? But very patchy with no clear pattern.
I think we should just relax for a while and keep looking at the figures and looking at it seat by seat. We'll be inventing a pattern to pretend we're seeing one at the moment.
Well, I'm relaxed. Are you relaxed, Nick Mitchell?
Yeah, my sense, Kerry, is that we are doing quite badly in Queensland, but we're holding the line in Victoria and New South Wales to an extent that I remain confident about the ultimate outcome.
But it really is coming down to that battle of preferences, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. Yep.
Victoria seems to be stronger than the Liberals than we might have expected, and it does look as if 7 seats for Labor is the outer limit in Queensland, and a mere handful in New South Wales. It's starting to look
Like it's not going to be
pretty
enough.
tough for Labor, I would have thought.
Yeah.
I would have thought around 20 or so is about the outer limit at this point.
This election is going to depend on the results in Western Australia. It's the first time in a long time that's happened. But I've now got Labor Party winning only 72 seats on the prediction. As some South Australian results have come in, the swing to Labor has started to slide off, and the prediction model has started to change. But we haven't had any Western Australian results, and of course there's 3 independents in Western Australia. So currently, if I say Labor's got 72, the coalition 76, well, that 76 is actually other parties, not the coalition. And so it's going to depend whether those independents get up in Western Australia as to what sort of majority we have in the parliament.
There you go, a late night coming up. Now, what about the seat of Parramatta? This is, on paper, this is another seat that that Labor really should be winning if it's going to form a government, but it was always going to be tough for some reason. Anthony, how's it looking?
Well, the Liberal Party's Ross Cameron won this off Paul Elliott at the last election, and he's back to contest again. It's a very diverse electorate. It crosses the social divide of Sydney from the north shore to the western suburbs, and it's always a marginal seat when it's on these boundaries. Now, the booths that have come in obviously favour the Labor Party, because once we factor in the booths and an estimate of preferences, it shows the Liberal Party ahead, though there has been a swing of about 2.4% to Labor. That's too close to call, and we'll wait on preference counts on that one, because there's a bit of a vote for, like, One Nation have 7%, and I'm not sure how their preferences have gone in that election.
Nick Mitchell?
Again, no improvement in the ALP vote, and Ross Cameron is a very good member. I think we'll hold that seat.
Okay, what about the seat of Hunter, which is around, of course, the Hunter region, just around Newcastle?
Well, it looks like, look, there was some talk of One Nation doing well in this electorate. It doesn't look like the Labor Party's had any problem with this electorate at all at this stage. We have 26 of the 78 booths. Labor Party's on 54%, even their primary votes up 2.7. And after an estimated distribution of preferences, or we can't show that one, unfortunately, we're estimating the Labor Party's on 63% after preferences, so we think they'll hold that one comfortably.
Okay, now we've got a couple of interesting New South Wales seats coming up. We've got Lindsay, which is in the Sydney's outer western suburbs, the very popular Liberal member, Jackie Kelly.
Yeah.
She had a huge swing in 96, then retained it on a by-election, and is on a margin of 1.6%.
Yes, I mean, it seems the Grim Reaper has got 76 votes there as well. The Liberal Party's leading at this stage. Now, the count seems to be rather slow in this election. I would bet there's an awful lot of scrutineering going on by both parties at this stage. Look at it in percentage terms. Liberals are ahead, and when we're factoring in preferences and booths, watch the swing dial, and the swing is to the Liberal Party. It's going the wrong way for the Labor Party.
And once again, you've got One Nation polling just under 10% in the outer metropolitan area.
The Liberal Party's majority is built upon their success in the outer suburbs of Sydney and Brisbane at the last election, and two of those seats were Hughes and Lindsay, and there's no movement back. The Liberal Party have hung on to, and some of the announcements I made in the campaign were carefully directed at the young families that inhabit the outer suburbs of Sydney. And so it looks like if the government hangs on, it's because of the outer suburbs of Sydney and a well-targeted campaign in that area.
Okay, now what about Robertson? That's another interesting one. I know Labor has thrown a lot of money at this. They require a 3.6% swing to take it back from the sitting Liberal Jim Lloyd, and that, of course, is on that's just north of Sydney, around Gosford.
Yes, again, this is nowadays is basically an outer suburb of Sydney as well. Again, one of those outer suburban seats that swung so heavily to Labor. Jim Lloyd is ahead on the primary vote, ahead of Belinda Neal. That's the primary vote, but again, we'll factor in the preferences and votes here. Liberals are still ahead. There's a small swing to Labor, but not the 3.6% they need. And we have an actual preference count in that election. That's 12 booths with an actual preference count.
Okay, we looked at Eden Monero much earlier tonight, and as we said, that's New South Wales southeast, from stretching from the coast right across to Queanbeyan and Canberra, the borders of Canberra. That's a 4.8% swing required by Labor to win that back. How's that going?
Well, Gary Nairn is behind Steve Wan. Steve Wan is actually the son of the member who held the seat during the period of the Whitlam government, 72 to 75. He's ahead on the primary votes. Now again, it's a very diverse electorate, includes Queanbeyan as well. That's the rural votes. Now we'll factor in the booths and an actual preference count.
That's
and it shows a swing to Labor of 5.6%. We have a lot of people from this sort of area who may have voted in Eden Monero making sound effects at the back here. So that's one we'll be waiting on all night, but we do have a preference count there.
And in fact, yes, you've also got the postal votes, which will be a big factor there too. Okay, now let's look at some trends. Can we look at try and get an overview of New South Wales? We've got 18% of the vote counted there, in fact, and you're looking at a swing away from the Liberals in two-party preferred terms, away from the coalition in two-party preferred terms of 4.4%.
In fact, we'll look at the two-party preferred on this case, and we'll see that the Labor Party in the two-party preferred term has gone to 51.7%. Now, that's a swing of 4.4%, but it's not in the seats that Labor needs to get the vote. Look at the swing figures here on the change in primary votes. Labor vote's gone nowhere. Liberals and Nationals have lost vote to One Nation, and the other party's vote has dropped off. So I think what the Labor Party has done is picked up votes off the Greens and the Democrats while losing some votes to One Nation, and the coalition has votes to One Nation as well.
Bob McMullen, that's not looking good for Labor.
Well, I still think that at the end of the day, if history tells you if you deliver the votes, you'll deliver the seats. So I'm you'll find there'll be a few unusual ones come through, but obviously I'd like more of the seats to be showing up for us at the moment, but we're going to win a lot of seats in this election and a few more in Western Australia, I suspect, and regrettably there is a serious hung parliament option. I hope it doesn't happen. I'd never rather lose, but I'd almost rather lose than have that. That's a serious problem for the country, I think.
Kerry, I think New South Wales is demonstrating that Labor is getting the swing in the seats it already holds, but not in the marginals.
Yeah.
That's the problem they've got, and their primary vote is really not moving at all.
Yeah. Nick, earlier in the night you were saying 18 seats, possibly 20-seat loss as your maximum loss. Are you still kind of feeling roughly...
Yes, I do. I put that as the outer limit of our losses. I hope it's less than that. At this stage, I remain confident that that would be the outer limit because they're just not making the gains in New South Wales or Victoria that they need. Yes, we're down in Queensland, but there aren't enough seats there for Labor to win government.
Yeah. Barry, what's your overview?
I'm starting to get the same feeling that it's around the 2022 mark as an outer limit for Labor, though, look, Western Australia is still to come in, of course, and there are potentially 5 seats there for Labor if they're to do particularly well off the back of Kim Beazley, so we have to factor that in.
And once again, very mixed signals there. I know that the polling was suggesting those, around 3 to 4, possibly even the 5 seats to Labor, but Nick mentioned your feedback coming into the tally room tonight was that you were going to do okay in Western Australia.
Yeah, I think we can contain the losses there to no more than 2, and there won't be enough for Labor.
We in fact have 2 computer models, one which factors in the general swing and one which combines that with the actual result in electorates. And the general swing is showing a Labor majority, and the one where you factor in the result in the marginal seats as well is showing a Liberal majority. So in fact, what you're seeing is the Liberal Party are hanging on to the marginal seats, and at this stage, Labor's on 71 seats. The rest of the parliament is with the coalition and with independents. It's a bit hard to work that out.
Okay, well, while we organise our next set of numbers, we might switch across, Maxine McHugh, to you and Senator Meg Lees, the Democrats leader.
And Meg, I think you are beginning to see a pattern here, aren't you? And it's not really surprising you, is it?
No, and looking at the polls, we suspected all along that One Nation had a much bigger level of support than was clear, and I think that's what's showing up tonight.
Why is that the case? What explains the discrepancy between the votes we see on the screen, and this happened the same thing in Queensland, and what do those polls register?
Well, perhaps there are some people who are reluctant to say when they find what they're doing and put themselves down perhaps as undecided, I don't know, but it's what we've suspected for about a fortnight, and it's there, and it gives us big worries in the Senate, as we'll see in a couple of hours. But if it's carried through to the Senate, we are very concerned.
Let me ask you about the reps, first of all. I think Nick Minchin's already mentioned the possibility of a hung parliament. What do you think?
Well, it certainly seems that way at the moment. It's still very early, but yes, it's really too close to call.
You've got some figures on Mayo in South Australia, because I know you're just a bit optimistic, aren't you, that this might be your chance of a rep seat?
Well, we've put a lot of effort into this seat with our limited resources, and with a good candidate. It's showing us that John Schimmer's on about 27% with the early vote counted, Alexander Downer on 46, ALP on 13, and One Nation on 10. So we're going to need at least half of One Nation's preferences, and who knows where they're going to go. They could just nationally turn into a preference machine for the government.
And what, you seriously thinking you could take the Foreign Minister's seat?
Well, we're still in with a chance. The early figures for us are very, very hopeful.
All right. Now, what about the Senate? I mean, how do you see what we're seeing perhaps translated to the Senate?
Well, the polling down the eastern seaboard is roughly in line with what the polls were showing for us, which is a very slight drop on what it was last time. So if the reps polls are right, hopefully the Senate ones are as well, which showed us with a record vote. So we will just have to wait and see a couple more hours.
Well, anecdotally, what are you hearing? Because I mean, here in the ACT, you've had a very high-profile candidate in Rick Farley, in New South Wales, Aidan Ridgway. How do you think that's going?
Well, again, anecdotally, it's been very positive. We've had a huge amount of support, but we've always been concerned about this vote for One Nation. That while the polls weren't showing it was really there, the feeling we were getting was that it probably was there. So we are very concerned, but we'll just have to wait the night out and see how the Senate goes.
All right, okay, on that note. Back to you, Kerry. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Maxine. We're going to have a look at some of the counting in South Australia now. Of course, it was half an hour behind the eastern states in the polling booths closing. Can we have a look at the seat of Adelaide first, Anthony?
You know, this is the central city seat. I think this is one that Labor lost in '93. And it's the sort of seat, I think it's on about 3.5%. That Labor has to win this sort of seat to win government. Now, on the percentage votes at this stage, Labor Party is slightly ahead on primaries. If we factor in the booths and preferences, the Liberal Party are just ahead. The swing to Labor is not quite large enough. That is with an estimate of preferences. There's only was 9% with the Democrats, and we've factored in 60% of their preferences to the Labor Party. That's 7 of 48 booths. That one's definitely too close to call, but it's not the sort of big swing that we've seen in Victoria and Queensland.
And in fact, both sides of politics are expecting South Australia to hold strong for the coalition. Nobody can understand why, given the unpopularity of the Liberal government in South Australia and the huge swing at the last state election there. But nonetheless, that's the expectation. Now, what about the seat of Kingston? That's one that Labor really had to hope to win to get up at 27. This is another one which has been with Labor for a long time until the last election.
Certainly, and Labor's David Cox is actually leading at this stage on the primary count over Liberal Sue Jeans. This is a difficult seat for the Labor Party the Liberal Party to hold at this election. There seems to be quite a vote there for One Nation, about 8%, Democrats 10%. And if you factor in the booths and the preferences, we're seeing a swing of 3.5, and it's estimating 51.4, and he's quite right in saying too close to call. We've got a lot of preferences there. And again, only a slight rise in the Labor vote and a fall in the Liberal vote on primaries. And that one will go to preferences.
Nick Minchin, does that surprise you?
Tight, but I think we'll actually do better out of Democrat preferences there than the model anticipates because of Sir Jeans and her credentials. So I still don't think Labor's got that seat.
Bob?
Well, it's not in the bag. I'd rather be us than them, but it's got a way to go yet.
Okay, well, there's also the seat of Hindmarsh. That's less in contention because there's an 8% margin there held by Chris Gallas for the Liberal Party.
Well, the Liberal Party is, Chris Gallas is leading, but she has 4 booths, Morfettville, Camden Park, South Plympton and Glandore, and the Labor vote's about 40% up preferences in each of those 4 booths. So we'll look at that in primary votes. Look at the primary votes on that one. No, sorry, we can't actually look at that at the moment. But the Labor Party, we're estimating, is showing a swing of 10% in that electorate. But that's only on 4 booths, and they're in Liberal booths. And that one's a little hard to call on 4 booths. It's a slightly diverse electorate.
Now, Anthony, I know that Nick Minchin's got his own figures on Macon, which
now,
is.
if you look up Macon on your screen, I think you'll find.
Can we try and get Macon up while Nick's telling us? 9% of the vote counted. Nick, again, this was the most marginal seat, the one that Labor would hope to get first. 1.1% margin for Trish Draper of the Liberal Party.
Well, that's a phenomenal result. It's actually where my Senate office is, Kerry, but it's showing a swing to the Liberal Party, and I really do believe Trish Draper will hold that seat, which would be a disaster for the Labor Party.
She has 45% of the vote. Her vote's down on primaries 3%, and Labor's is on 34, down 4%. We're factoring in some preferences and booths here, and the swing is going the wrong way if you look at the swing dial. So again, there's another example where this is a very difficult election to call because the Liberal Party are doing well in the marginal seats, but I'd want to see a preference count given the size of the vote for the minor parties there.
But I suppose this is what you were talking about earlier, Bob, when you're talking about that 51.5% overall, that you might see a seat like Kingston.
Well, you've seen an interesting result there where if you believe these figures, we're trailing in Macon and leading in Hindmarsh.
Yes.
Now, and that's not impossible. I have to say, we significantly underperformed in Hindmarsh last time. The 8% was quite artificial, and we campaigned much better. Now, still we're very hard to win. I mean, 8% is pretty hard to get, particularly in a state where overall you don't seem to be doing as well. But those sorts of things can well cancel each other out. And in every election, you find seats you didn't expect to win, or that the pundits didn't expect you to win, that come in, and ones that are early on the pendulum that don't. Yeah. And that'll happen again. There's no doubt that'll happen again.
Okay, what about outside the metropolitan area, the seat of Grey? And that has swung both ways over time, but currently held by the Liberal Party with a margin of 8.5%. We've got 6% of the vote counted, Anthony.
This includes the Iron Triangle towns and vast areas of rural districts. The rural districts tend to come in first. Barry Wakeling is well ahead on these figures if you look at the percentages. As you can see, the Liberals are well ahead. It's showing a 4% after preferences and booths. It's showing a 4.3% swing to the Liberal Party. So in other words, away from Labor. But in an election like that, you can get diverse swings between booths. But that's a very good result for the Liberal Party in that electorate.
What's interesting there is the movement from the Labor Party to One Nation. Labor Party is suffering very badly at the hands of One Nation.
It's, there's been a decline in the Labor vote in that electorate over many years. There has been a decline in the population of Whyalla, Port Perry and Port Augusta. And Labor lost that, I think, in 1990, I think.
93, Barry Wakeland won.
And I'm not sure when they'll hold that seat again, the Labor Party.
Okay, and it's useful, I think, with the confusion that's around and the kind of different patterns from seat to seat within states and between states, let's review the big picture. There has been a swing, it seems, of almost 5% against the coalition on a two-party preferred basis. This could translate into a gain of up to 20 seats for Labor. Of course, it will depend on in which seats these votes fall, or the swings fall. In Tasmania, the ALP appears set for a clean sweep of all 5 seats, while One Nation is polling strongly with almost 9% of the primary vote. Pauline Hanson, it seems, comfortably ahead in the seat of Blair, but that gets tricky when you get down to preferences. This is Australia Votes from the National Tally Room. Okay, Anthony, let's look at the figures to back up that national overview. I think 23.4% of the vote counted so far down the eastern seaboard and to some degree South Australia and the Northern Territory.
And you're seeing Labor polling about 41%, which is 40 to 41%, which is what they've polled through the campaign. The Liberal and National Party vote is down on what some of the polls have indicated, and the One Nation vote seems to be slightly up, and the other vote seems to be slightly up. Now, let's look at that in two-party preferred terms. It's showing a swing of 4.8 to Labor, and Labor ahead, but it doesn't seem to be quite getting there in terms of seats. Now, look at the change in vote. This is very revealing. The Labor vote is creeping up by about 2%. The Liberal vote and National vote has fallen. It seems to be One Nation seems to be beneficiaries, and the vote for the other minor parties has fallen. And so that's the overall picture at this stage. At this stage, our projection now is showing Labor on 71 seats, which is 3 seats short of a hung parliament. Liberals and other parties on 77 combined. So
just tell me, how confident are you of that prediction?
I'm starting to see some preference counts come in now, and a couple of seats which looked like the Labor Party were winning, their vote has dropped off. But I've got the suspicion it's quite erratic, because some seats I thought they weren't there are suddenly swinging to them. So I think this factor of the way One Nation were directing their preferences from seat to seat has produced a slightly erratic swing. But again, we'll be waiting for Western Australia to be absolutely sure what the figure is.
Okay, let's look at New South Wales. 26% of the vote counted there.
No. Doing some seats.
Well, maybe, all right. Well, we won't do the state breakdown just at this point. Ballarat in Victoria, another regional seat, which has got an interesting story to tell. Although it's held by the Liberal Party, Michael Ronaldson, with only a 3.7% margin. My understanding is that the Liberal Party has always been pretty confident of holding this seat.
Yeah.
Anthony?
This is within the 4% of the 8 seats in Victoria that Labor needed to win. But on these figures, it's not one they're picking up. The swing to them is not big enough. Again, the swing is less in a marginal seat. You're seeing the Liberal Party on 47.6, Labor on 37.8, and One Nation only polling low, as in most of the Victorian seats. We have a preference count. Watch the swing dial. Swing dial is not big enough. The Liberals are ahead, 51.9. We're not definitely giving away to them yet, but they are ahead at this stage. And I'd say progressing towards a victory in that seat. And if Labor can't win that seat, they've got to win a seat beyond 4% to replace it.
But you were expecting that you were going to have to do that, Bob McMullen?
Ballarat's a very hard seat to win. The swings always seem to be smaller in Ballarat. When we held it, the swings against, but we held it for 10 years and the swings against us tended to be lower than the average. And since we've lost it, we've had the same problem. It's a very stable electorate. And those figures look fairly substantial. And if you start getting some actual preference distributions that look like that, I'd say you start to say we won't win that. But of course, I think there are seats outside the 4.3%. There are the Petries and others where we might be leading. So I think let's just wait a while. But our candidate, Mark Card in Ballarat's a very good a person I really liked and enjoyed working with. So I'm disappointed if we don't win it for her. She'd have made a contribution. But so far, let's not give it away yet.
Okay. One of the other interesting seats in Victoria is the seat of Chisholm in Melbourne, and that was held by the Liberal Health Minister, Dr. Michael Wooldridge, on a margin of 2.6%, which I think he felt was a bit too close for comfort. He's moved to Casey to contest Casey. How's Chisholm looking in his absence, Anthony?
Well, the Labor Party candidate, Anna Burke, is leading at this stage ahead of Peter Vlahos for the Liberal Party.
Kerry.
We've got quite a substantial vote, about 7% there for the Democrats.
Yep, okay.
And if we look at that in two-party preferred terms, I think this is very interesting to watch. The Liberals are still ahead in Chisholm. And there's another seat under 4%, and we actually have a preference count in that electorate. And the Liberal vote, they are holding up in that seat. I mean, it is too close to call. Now I'm looking close. I only have 5 booths with preferences, and there are 34 in that electorate. So that's quite correct to call it too close to call.
Just this once, Anthony, the Electoral Commission has got 6 booths with two-party preferred, and they've got Anna Burke ahead, 50.49 after 15% of the vote two-party preferred. So it's very tight, but at the moment she's got her nose in front.
I'd say, Kerry, we're 4% behind on primaries with 41% counted. I think that seat will be very difficult to hold.
Right, okay. Now, what about another one of those Victorian seats that Labor has to win, and that's on a margin of 1.4%, La Trobe, held by Bob Charles for the Liberal Party.
Well, Bob Charles has held on to this, again, the last 3 elections. He won it in 1990. He's currently ahead of Labor's Carolyn Hirsch, who contested the seat last time. She's a former state member of Parliament. Bob Charles is considered a very hard-working member, even though he's got such a small, marginal seat. You always have to be a hard-working local member. And factoring in the booths and preferences at this stage, we're showing a 2% swing to Labor, too close to call. That's 14 of 42 booths with a preference count.
Again, Labor going backwards, Kerry. I think that is too close to call, but if Labor can't clearly win a seat like La Trobe tonight, they're not going to win the election, in my view.
Bob McMillan, what Nick was just saying is that if Labor can't clearly win La Trobe tonight, you can't win government.
Well, Nick's whistling to keep his courage up at the moment. I think we'll win La Trobe.
But I think he's saying you've got to win it fairly decisively.
It goes down to the wire, and you've got to do better than that if you're going to win overall.
Given all the expectations in Victoria.
And it goes deeper than that too. You look at Deakin and Dunkley, they're seats that Labor should be winning. Labor's trailing in both of those seats. It's just not looking good at all for Labor in Victoria. Kerry, we just had a note from Queensland too, and we should at some stage look at Pauline Hanson's seat because her support is slipping. She's certainly no certainty on what we're seeing now.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that in a minute, but since you talked about Dunkley, let's look at Dunkley again. It's in the outer southeast metropolitan area of Melbourne, around Frankston. The sitting Liberal, Bruce Bilson, on a margin of 3.4%. Anthony, there's 37% of the vote counted. How's that looking?
There's a bit of spray amongst other candidates, One Nation, a Green, a Democrat. The Labor Party, it's got a couple of very, very strong Liberal booths around. I think it's Mount Eliza or Mount Arthur, I can't quite remember. Just trying to remember all these booths gets a bit hard sometimes. But after the preferences, we have a preference count here, and we're showing only a tiny swing to the Labor Party, and the Liberals are ahead in that electorate. And with only 5 booths, the computer's saying that's too close to call. There's a bit of bobbing around amongst the early booths there. But now that we're actually getting preference counts in, it's looking less good for the Labor Party. Clearly, the Labor Party is not doing so. We're showing Labor up to 72 seats. That's still our projection forward. But I think at this stage, we've got the Labor Party, we'll just have a quick look, the Liberals have a definite 61 seats. So there's still an awful lot of seats in doubt. We've got a long way to go tonight.
Okay, now another Victorian seat, the seat of Macmillan.
Well, this one's bobbing backwards and forwards quite a lot at the moment. On the current count, we've got Russell Broadbent ahead. Christian Zara is trailing on the primary count. But this is an electorate where the biggest booths, the very biggest booths, come in last, and they tend to favour the Labor Party. Just as a note there, Barry Cunningham, the former member standing as independent, got 5% of the vote. Now, when we factor in the booths, which is the most critical factor here, we have the Labor Party just sneaking ahead. That's too close to call. That's a preference count in 30 of the 68 booths in that electorate.
And in fact, we have Christian Zara, the Labor candidate, standing by in that electorate. Christian Zara, you're on a knife edge.
Yeah, well, it's very close, Kerry, very close. We've had 6% of the total counted here, and we've got a 3.2% swing to us. So we're very far from declaring, but we feel pretty good about it, and we'll be watching with anticipation as the results come in.
Now, Barry Cunningham, of course, was the Labor member. He had a long association with the Labor Party. He's now running as an independent, and his preferences are not necessarily going to help you, are they?
Oh, that's a personal disappointment for me because I actually worked for Barry, but apart from that, I think Barry will have about as much impact on this seat as any of the other minor parties and independents.
So, what's your gut feeling right at this minute?
Well, I guess we've had a mixture of boos come in, and there's been a swing to us. It's varied from about 2% to 5%. So on the balance, you'd say the mood of the people is with us. But, you know, this seat is very diverse, and Anthony's got it right. We've got the industrial heartland of the Latrobe Valley, and we've also got the small rural boos, so it's a mixture.
But of course, the preferences are absolutely crucial. What are you picking up from scrutineers in terms of the preferences?
Well, they're telling us that we're getting a majority of Australia First and Shooters Party preferences, but that the One Nation preferences are a bit soft. One Nation are polling about 5% here in McMillan.
But have you got a sense of the breakdown of the One Nation preferences, how they're flowing?
As I said, they're breaking about 50-50 here in McMillan.
About 50-50.
Yeah.
Okay, Christian, thanks very much, and perhaps we'll be back to you later in the night.
Thanks, Kerry.
We might now take a look at a couple of seats that have got particular interest. We talked earlier to Cheryl Curnow in the Brisbane marginal seat of Dixon that had been held by Labor until the last election, now contested by Cheryl Curnow. Anthony, how's that looking?
Watch this. I can see what's coming. The Labor Party's ahead on primary votes ahead of Henshaw. Smith has got a significant flow of preferences there, a significant count, so is Campfield. Smith is the former Liberal member. Now, look at that in percentage terms. Labor Party's on 41.3. There's a smattering of preferences all over the place. There's Greens, there's Democrats. We have an actual preference count from 14 of the 32 booths, and the Liberal Party is ahead in that election. So the estimates of preferences I had earlier were not reliable. It may be that those Democrats and those Greens are not directing preferences to Cheryl Curnow.
And that's a disciplined... that their directions are holding.
Well,
Bob McMullen, that would be a huge blow for Labor.
Yeah, we'd be extremely disappointed if that were to be the case, because there'd be a loss of an outstanding contributor to Australian politics. But I haven't got any inside information to challenge it. That seems to be an actual count. So Cheryl's going to have to improve to win. The preference flows are very strange. I was just saying to Nick that there's some of those Queensland seats like Longman and Fairfax that weren't on anybody's list. Although I have to say Longman was on my wildcard list, in which we are either leading or very close. So there are going to be seats that shift that no one's forecast, and seats that we all took into account that we might not win. So it's too early to be talking about the overall result, but that's a really tough position for Cheryl.
You'd have to be surprised, Nick, if that happens in Dixon.
Well, it would be a disaster for Labor if Curnow doesn't win, given that there's quite a big swing to Labor in Queensland generally. If they can't get Curnow up, it's a disaster.
And what about Bob's observations about some of those other seats that would really surprise if Labor came into close contention, like Fairfax and so on?
Well, the problem Cheryl Curnow had in Dixon was that people were preferencing against her. That was always the thing she was facing. But I agree, there are going to be seats in the 6-7% margin in Queensland that we could lose, given the general swing.
Okay, Meg Lees was talking earlier about having some outside hope of plucking Mayo from the Liberal Party, which on the face of it would seem a tall order because Alexander Downer holds that seat with a 15% margin. But of course it's not that simple. Anthony, what's it showing?
Oh, having a look here, it's rather hard to make sense of some of these figures in a seat like Mayo because we're not really getting a comparison of boos when you've got quite a spray of vote amongst other parties. The Democrats are running second in that electorate, but Alexander Downer's got 11,859 votes. He's higher than combined Democrat and ALP vote. Let's look at that in percentage terms. It makes it easier to start adding up. His primary vote is below 46.7%. I don't think we've got a two-party preferred, but let's look at the primary swings in this electorate. And you'll see what's actually happened here is that there was a big fall in the Liberal vote and quite a spray of votes to One Nation and Democrats. The electoral office is counting between Labor and the Liberals in that election, so we haven't got any sensible preferences in that.
Okay, now the seat of Bennelong. The Prime Minister's electorate on the lower North Shore of Sydney, which he holds with a 10% margin, which on the face of it is quite safe, and you'd expect it to remain safe, except that there are a number of dynamics that make Bennelong very interesting. Anthony, how's that looking?
Well, there's a lot of candidates here, still over 80, despite all the candidates, and there were a lot of candidates on that ballot paper. There's another 6 grouped together under other there. John Howard's on 8,736. Wendy Marn, the Labor candidate's 5,428. Look at that in percentage terms. John Howard's going to still hold that comfortably. He's on 51.4.
Already.
When we factor in the preferences and booths, there has been a swing of about 4.5% against him. But again, that was a seat the Liberal Party wasn't going to lose.
No.
Now, if they got 4.5% swing in Lindsay or Hughes or one of those seats, the Labor Party would be happy. But to get a 4.5% swing in Bennelong is not what the Labor Party wanted.
I think John Howard would be pretty relaxed and comfortable about that, Nick.
I think he should be very comfortable with that, yeah.
Okay, can we just go back to Tasmania now, where things were not looking so good for Warwick Smith in Bass. Can we have a quick look, because I know that Warwick Smith is standing by. 60% of the vote counted, Anthony.
Well, we now have some preference counts. Michelle O'Byrne's still ahead, 16,899 to 16,578. We have a count in 38 of the 54 booths after preferences. Let's look at the primary votes, and then we'll factor in the preferences. That's too close to call.
Wow. Warwick Smith, you're getting a bit excited there. That suggests to me there must have been a point when you were super worried. Now that's 50-50. 50-50, what do you reckon?
Well, I tell you, Gary, we're a specialist on close calls here. We lost it in 93 by 40 votes after 3 recounts against someone with the same surname. I don't have that problem this time, but look, it was always going to be close. I think we'll do very well on the pre-polls. We're going to have to wait for a little while to get a final result here. I'm getting a slightly stronger flow of Green preferences this time than I have done previously, because they didn't have a disciplined preference flow this time. And some of those One Nation votes will come my way as well. The other Smith that's running, and it seems to be something that's dogged me here for a long time, I think some of his preferences are coming quite strongly our way as well. So I don't think we'll get a result here tonight, but this is the litmus test for the nation, and I'm hanging on, and all these great supporters here are hanging on as well.
Of course, as you say, this is the second time you find yourself in this situation of possibly losing the seat for a second time. If you do lose it, what do you think will have cost you the seat?
Well, undoubtedly, there's a vote here against one issue this time. It's the GST, and if I lose it, Gary, maybe I'll come after your job.
Well, you're welcome to try. Warwick Smith, we might check with you a bit later in the night if the story changes, but thanks for making yourself available.
Thanks a lot, Gary.
Okay, we might now take a look at a few more of the seats where we've got prominent sitting members, and of course the seat of Farrer in New South Wales, in rural New South Wales, which is Tim Fischer's seat. On the face of it, a very safe seat for the National Party. Tim Fischer is the leader of the National Party, a margin of 21%. How's that looking, Anthony?
Well, Tim Fischer will hold this comfortably, which makes it interesting in this electorate to look at the percentages and the change in the primary percentages, because that's the interesting thing to watch. Tim Fischer's comfortably holding the seat. We've got a preference count 33 of the 92. Look at the swing figures here, and you can see that the people who predicted he'd halve his vote are not quite correct. It's only 12%, not 30%. Tim Fischer has held on. He has lost, what's that, about roughly 12% to One Nation, but not nearly enough for him to be in trouble in a seat like that. He still holds it with a margin of over 15%.
Yeah. Okay, now, of course, the other one that the National Party was very nervous of at one point, but not so much now, is the seat of Gwydir, which is held by the Deputy National Party leader, John Anderson. That's in northwest New South Wales, centred around Moree. Again, this is a seat which is more interesting to look at in terms of the percentage votes and the swing figures rather than the two-party preferred. Anderson's ahead there, 44.5. That's a substantial fall in his vote, as is shown by the swing graphic. What's happened there has been a substantial fall in his vote. It has gone to One Nation. Labor's vote's roughly stalled. So John Anderson, on our preference count, has had a swing after preferences of about 4%, but he still held it very comfortably. So the National Party is here to live another day, unlike some of its doomsayers over the last few months. And speaking of those who live on, we should take a look at Blair now, because the indications are that Pauline Hanson's vote is slipping there. Well, there's 52% of the vote counted. Spray of the votes all over the place there. Let's look at this in percentage terms. It gets rather hard to add up the numbers. We'll leave it there for a moment and show you One Nation on 38%, Labor 23, Nationals 10, Liberals 21. The preference count tonight of the electoral office is between One Nation and the Liberal Party. We've got a count in a number of booths. Actually, what I'm about to show is not comparing booths. It is only showing an actual preference count. If we look at that in two-party preferred terms, it's showing the Liberals slightly ahead on 52.
We're not giving that away. I haven't got a booth comparison of that vote, and you don't really. You can't compare the Liberals with One Nation on a booth basis.
No, but it certainly looks like it's starting to fade for Pauline Hanson.
Yes.
Yes.
She's been going backwards all night in that seat.
Okay. And in fact, it's timely, I think, to throw to Maxine McHugh because she has Ian Sinclair and One Nation, Pauline Hanson's partner in One Nation, David Oldfield.
In fact, David, can I start with you? Your comment on Pauline Hanson's vote there, as Nick mentioned, said it has been slipping back all night, and it's what now 37% primary there.
Well, I mean, obviously we wouldn't be happy about that, but it's not impossible for her to win from that position. It's just a matter of how much leakage actually occurs between the National Party, Labor Party and Liberal Party and what order they're going to go out.
How might you see that going?
Well, the National Party will obviously go out first, and there could be a fair bit of leakage from that straight to Pauline rather than straight to the Liberal Party. And then it's a matter of what occurs between Liberal and Labor and what Green and Democrat vote goes to Labor.
Ian? How do you see Blair, first of all?
Well, I think Blair is one of those seats where it all depends who goes out first. The trouble in determining preferences is that if you try and make a calculation, a lot depends on which order people go out. Maxine, I think at this stage it would seem that Pauline will be very lucky to hold it, but I think it's too early to call. I think at the same time that the National Party vote there is nowhere near as good as I thought it might have been. It's one of those seats that covers much traditional National Party territory, and from the Nationals' point of view, I don't think the vote is very satisfactory at all.
David, what comment would you make about your vote elsewhere? I mean, Meg Lees on this program sort of said not so long ago she thinks the One Nation will end up being really a preference machine for the government.
I don't think that's likely to happen. I think that the One Nation preferences are probably going to go in a number of places, because we've really split the tickets. So the people are deciding where our preferences are going to a large degree, and they will go everywhere.
But most One Nation people surely would be on the Conservative side of politics, so most of them would come back to the coalition, surely.
The mistake that people make is that they don't understand that there are a lot of Labor people who are Conservative people, and they vote Labor. And One Nation attracts votes from both sides. In certain seats, we could attract almost an equal number of ex-Labor voters as we would ex-Liberal or National Party voters.
Ian, did you see any of the double-sided how-to-vote cards from One Nation?
No, I didn't, but I confess that I've always found them rather strange. Double-sided how-to-vote cards tend to confuse rather than necessarily lead to a result. But I think that David's right, that there are a lot of those who would have given a primary vote to One Nation who come from the Labor Party, particularly those who are concerned about the firearm laws, for example, where there is a genuine belief by many that One Nation's view is preferable to that of the Labor Party or the Conservative parties, and therefore people who voted Labor normally would probably go back to Labor if they, for example, in-town shooters and have lost their firearms. But I think it's likely that One Nation preferences, as far as we can see at the moment, running about 60% in favour of the National Liberal parties, so they are certainly going to be very material in the final washout.
Now, that being the case, what do you see as an overall picture, if there is one?
Well, I still think that the coalition will get back, but I think they're going to get back narrowly. There's certainly a swing against us. This stage is between 4 and 5%. My assessment is that the National Party, however, is going to, at the moment it appears, lose Capricornia in Queensland. We had hoped we'd do better in Broome than we have. I don't think we'll pick that up. When you come to New South Wales, we've certainly lost Hume to the Liberal Party.
That's Albie Schultz, is it?
That's Albie Schultz, that's
He'll
right.
pick that up, yeah.
And Parkes is a seat that worries me. I think that it still could go anywhere. That was the seat that Michael Cobb was the member. It covers about a third of New South Wales, but it's very early days in that seat. It's a very, very big electorate, and I understand we have a very good campaign, and our candidate's still quite optimistic.
What about, how are you reading Queensland, David?
Well, we seem to have a very good overall primary vote. It's looking good from the Senate point of view, and certainly where Pauline's concerned, we think she's still hanging in there.
And I think that Anthony said before, in terms of, just about the Parliament, I think he was talking about 72, 76. Do you think that might be what we're looking at?
Well, we haven't seen the West Australian vote yet, and I really think that it's too early. I mean, it's just on 8 o'clock, and until we get those West Australian returns, I think it's going to be very difficult to know what the outcome will be. We always should remember, however, that West Australia has always been contrary. If there's a swing one way in the east, it's just likely to be the other way in the west. And I think it's going to be a very interesting night watching what happens in West Australia and see whether or not it follows the trends in the eastern states. The trend in South Australia, for example, is nowhere near as much in favour of the Labor Party as I think many suggested it would be. And while the Liberals have lost in Pearce Kingston, for example, in Grey, a seat which Labor's held more often than not, it appears that Barry Wakefield certainly going to continue to hold it.
But the story at this stage, I mean, the ALP not getting a seat it would need.
Well, that's right. I think the picture at the moment is that both Liberal and National Party have lost seats, but not enough to put Labor in government.
All right. Thanks both for the moment. Kerry.
Thanks, Maxine. And I think it has reached the stage where there is a consensus view on this panel that Labor simply cannot get enough seats to form government, even though there are still many confusions about the overall picture. Anthony Green?
Yes, when you look at the chamber, I think that's sort of...
Well, we'll have a look at the chamber in a minute, but if you just very quickly first, can you tell me how, I mean, is Labor out of the race in terms of having a real expectation of forming government?
No.
You want the chamber?
I want the chamber.
Well, while they're working on the chamber, I'll go to Nick Minchin. Nick?
Yeah, I think we're going to end up with around 80 seats, and Labor just hasn't made the gains in New South Wales and Victoria they needed in order to win government. We've lost in Queensland, certainly, but I think my earlier prediction of about 18 seats total is looking pretty good.
Yeah, that's still a very nasty result, isn't it?
No, I think...
18 seats lost.
If Labor can't beat the government, when we're putting forward a new tax, a GST, this is a disaster for Labor. It's a magnificent result for John Howard to win government, again, putting forward a whole new tax system. I mean, first time it's ever happened in the Western world. And if we can have a 12-seat majority, it's terrific.
Barry Cassidy?
Well, Kerry, clearly the coalition will win this election. The question is whether it will be a minority government. I doubt it. It looks as if they will not need the support of the independents. And the way it's going, I don't think they'll need the support of the phantom independents either, the Queensland Nationals. I think Nick's original tip of around 18 gains to Labor might be pretty close to the mark.
Bob?
Well,
these guys on either side of you are calling the outcome.
They've got me surrounded, but I obviously won't call the outcome just yet. But I am disappointed with the results in some of the seats. But the odd thing is that as seats like the Longmans and the Hindmarshes, which are popping up, which aren't on anyone's list, while those that are on the list are not coming through. I did predict that that's what would happen, but I hope there's a few more of them.
And Anthony Green, have we got that chamber graphic now because that perhaps will tell the tale?
Yes, well, if we bring up the chamber, what we show first, and we'll show all three stages, we will begin by showing the seats that we've definitely given away to one party or the other. We'll fill them in there. And we've currently given away that many seats to either side of politics. The Liberals 47, Nationals 13, which gets them up to 60, Labor 55, others too. Factor in a couple of likelies, which are leaning that way, and you get the coalition up to 64, Labor on 59. Now then we're going to do our prediction, our projection forward. Now, that shows a coalition majority of 6. That's 77 seats, Labor 68, others 3. That's without any West Australian figures. If I project some of the swings in the other states through to Western Australia, if Labor picks up 1 seat, the coalition's down to 76. If they pick up 2, it's down to 75. If they pick up 3, it's down to 74. But then the Liberals may pick up Kurt, and that's back up to 75. So, you know, the polls have only just closed in Western Australia. It's so going to depend on the result in Western Australia.
So you're still saying that you can't call it until we know Western Australia?
I think Western Australia will, if the government holds under seats in Western Australia, that will push the government over the line. If they lose a couple of seats in Western Australia, it might be back into hung parliament territory.
Okay, well, another very knowledgeable Liberal senior cabinet minister who's got a long history of machine politics as well as the parliament, and who knows how the numbers crunch, not just in Queensland but around the rest of the country. John Moore, John Howard's industry minister. John, how are you reading it?
I think it's a very tight race. What's really happening in Queensland is that the vote that's gone from the coalition parties have gone to minority to the Labor Party, and the rest, of course, the minority parties. And that's going to make it very hard for Labor to win a lot of seats in Queensland.
Have you got any sense of how One Nation's preferences are breaking down, John?
I think, Kerry, that in the country areas they might be as high as 70%.
Yeah.
I'm anticipating in the metropolitan area probably 60 to 70%.
Now, you're one of those who believes that Pauline Hanson will not win Blair.
No, I've never thought she would win Blair.
Yeah. So that's a Liberal seat. What about Groom, where I know that you and other Liberals had high hopes for Ian McFarlane, the new candidate there? That's the Toowoomba-based seat. How are you reading that?
Well, it's going to be very close. It depends whether the One Nation and the National Party finish in terms of their primary vote. The ironic part about this is the Labor Party preferences are going to the National Party. Under those circumstances, they could win it.
Okay, now...
McFarlane's a good candidate, and he could easily win.
Your ministerial colleague, Nick Minchin, has basically called the election. As far as he's concerned, he thinks you'll end up with around 80 seats or thereabout in the Parliament. How does that accord with your instincts?
Well, I think that's pretty close to the mark. I thought that we'd lose somewhere between 18 and 20 seats.
Okay, John, we may well come back to you later in the night, but thanks for... It goes without saying, I suppose, that you're safe in yours. I don't think you've ever been pressed all that hard in Ryan.
Good candidate, Kerry.
I wonder how much longer he's going to front up. Do you reckon you'll see out? You reckon you'll see out the whole of the next 3 years?
All Queenslanders will stay us.
Okay, John Moore, thanks for that. Now, we're going to cross in a few minutes to the member for Capricornia, which is another one of those seats that Labor was really hoping to win, although it was always going to be a hard one to gain. Capricornia, can we take a quick look, Anthony, at the latest counting in Capricornia? Nearly 60% of the vote counted there.
Kirsten Livermore, who's the Labor Party candidate, is well ahead on primary vote. It's been quite a substantial rise in the vote for One Nation. You can look at it in percentage terms, you get some sort of handle there. The Labor vote's 49.4. On a primary vote, their vote is up 8%, so that's quite a substantial rise in their vote. And you factor it through to preferences, watch the swing dial. We're seeing a very substantial swing to the Labor Party, something like 9.7%. So it's actually very interesting. A number of people have written over the last...
Anthony, look, I'll cut into you there because we're about to lose the satellite to Rockhampton, where Paul Marrick is standing by. So let's very quickly, Paul Marrick, those figures look bad for you.
Well, people might say that, but this is exactly what it was like when we won Capricornia back in March 96. Now, I see the figures, probably only 30-odd% of them counted, and this is much of what it was like this time in the March 96 election. Now, you've got to understand that the preferences from One Nation are running anywhere between 70 and 80% towards me. So when those preferences are counted and some of the other booths come in, it will make a significant difference.
But enough of a difference to allow you to retain the seat? I mean, are you telling me that you're actually confident at this stage?
Hey, listen, you better tell Ian Sinclair that we're still hanging on well. And I guess I feel a little bit like Smithy down in Tasmania.
Well, he's 50-50. Your figures look worse than that, but you've got the local knowledge. Paul Marrick, thanks for talking to us. I don't know that we'll get back to you tonight, but yours looks like one of those seats that we won't know about for a little while.
We'll see how it goes later on the night. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we might take a look at a few other Queensland seats in Brisbane. The seat of Griffith, which the Liberals' Graham McDougall holds with a margin of 1.5%. That was one that Labor would have expected to fall quite early. What's the picture with 50% of the vote counted?
50% of the vote counted and a preference counting 28 of the 37 booths. We can see that Kevin Rudd is leading, and there's a vote for other parties. We've got a preference count. We're comparing the booths. We're seeing the Labor Party winning that seat with a swing of 4.6%. Again, significantly smaller than in some of the more marginal seats. Smaller in the marginal seats than in the safe seats.
Yes.
Again, peculiarly, someone said to me months ago that Labor wouldn't win because they wouldn't win seats in regional areas. Well, some of the biggest swings have been in regional areas, like Capricornia.
And some of the ones that Labor has been expecting to pick up, they simply aren't. Speaking of which, let's have a look at Dixon, which is the seat that Cheryl Curnow had hoped to use as her vehicle into the Parliament, and that was looking very shaky for Cheryl Curnow a while ago. You've now got 58% of the vote counted. 58%
of the primary vote. More importantly, we have a preference count in 15 of the 32 booths. Now, on that basis, you get a smattering of vote rather than 9% for Smith. That's too close to call.
But that has come back a little, hasn't it, to Cheryl Curnow?
The important thing there is the how to vote card. If people are not handing out how to vote cards in every booth, then the preferences are not going to flow. We may be seeing a difference in preferences from booth to booth.
I mean, are we also possibly seeing that the decision by both the Greens and the Democrats to direct their preferences away from Cheryl Kernot may cost her this seat?
It's looking like that, yes.
Bob McMullen?
Well, as you just said, the last figure I got back from from Dixon was showing a bit of an improvement in the situation for Cheryl, but it needs to continue to improve. It's really touch and go there. A lot of votes to count. I would reckon she'd do better she's one of those high-profile people who'll do better in the people who voted early and people who voted on the day. So
her party, her old party, the Democrats, may well end up wreaking vengeance on her tonight.
Oh, that's sort of next week analysis, Kerry.
Nonetheless, a question that is there to be raised.
Yes.
Kerry, this is an actual two-party preferred count in 15 booths showing, that the Liberal Party will hold that seat.
Yes.
Which would be a remarkable result.
Okay, can we have a look at another very interesting Queensland seat, and that's the seat of Petrie, which is in Brisbane's northern suburbs. It's held by Teresa Gambaro with in normal circumstances would be a comfortable margin of 8.3%. We've got nearly 80% of the vote counted, and that's in doubt, Anthony.
Well, it seems like the Liberal Party have managed a superb campaign where they've managed to hold on to all the seats, whatever the margin, by about 0.5%. What you're seeing here is those are the figures. We've got 11% for One Nation, 5% for the Democrat. Factor in the preferences, factor in the booths, 50.3. So in some seats which are held by 4%, they've kept the swing to 3.5, and a seat with an 8% margin, they've kept it to 7.5. So at the moment, I've got over 10 Liberal Party seats on margins of under 0.5%.
So
why it's an astonishing close result.
Nick mentioned that that tells us, I imagine, that the enormous effort that you've put into winning those second preferences has actually worked for you.
I think
that may well have held government for you.
I think Lytton Crosby and the campaign team have done a fantastic job. The second preference strategy does seem to be operating. I mean, Petrie was not one of our primary marginal seats, so the resources have gone into others. So we have suffered a bigger swing there, but we're still holding it. That's the point.
Bob McMullen, were you always concerned that you might not be... I remember in 1990, it was Labor's very clever, targeted campaign to get those second preferences back that held government for you. Were you worried that this time it was going to go the other way?
Well, it was always clear that the preferences were going to be very hard to call, and that one was always very doubtful that what the opinion pollsters were getting as preference indications was going to show up. Not for any reason other than that's a very hard thing to pick up in an opinion poll, preferences, and that was always the risk. But the overall result, I have to say, in Petrie is a very great credit to Rosemary Hume, and it's not a seat anyone to give away at the moment. It's a very good result.
Can we take a look at the trend graphic for Queensland now? Just get a sense. There's 55.5% of the vote counted, Anthony, and
well, we're seeing here the Labor Party vote's only 3% higher than last time. Let's just look at, Liberals 30, Nationals 10. The swing figures are actually more useful to look at here because of what's happened to the vote.
One Nation's come back.
Yeah, Labor Party's only picked up 3% of the vote that's been lost by other parties.
Yeah.
14.8% to One Nation. That's translating into a 7% swing after preferences. So in fact, there's a fair smattering of those votes that have gone to One Nation drifting back to the Labor Party as preferences. And at the moment, I think this election is rather interesting at the moment that I think Kim Beazley is going to do what Andrew Peacock did in 1990. He's going to win a majority of the vote, but not win government. And at the moment, it's looking like Labor might end up with 51% of the two-party preferred vote at the end of the election, but not be in government. So in fact, the pollsters might have been right with the vote, and the government was right with the seats.
Well, in fact, I remember Sol Levovic saying right at the start of the campaign that the mood was reminding him of 1990. Yeah, and your prediction, Anthony, is 44. You've got 79 on your prediction going to the coalition.
Yes. So 78, I'm putting that down to after trying to factor in what's happening in Western Australia. Yeah. But as I said, there's a lot of seats under 0.5%, but we actually have preferences counts in them. I tell you what, the government's going to have a lot of marginal seats after this election.
Okay. Let's take a look at the big picture with more than a quarter of the primary votes tallied. It now appears that the government will hang on despite a swing to Labor of almost 5% on a two-party preferred basis. The breakdown simply does not translate into enough ALP gains to give them government, although they could end up with as many as 20 seats. With Labor needing to win 27 seats to get across the line, the current trend would give the coalition something like a 10-seat majority or slightly more. Much of the damage to the government's majority had occurred in Queensland, where Labor appears likely to pick up 6 seats, with another 2 looming as possible ALP gains, and of course a seat with great interest, that of Cheryl Kernow's. I should stress that the tally so far largely reflects the vote on the eastern seaboard, to an extent South Australia, with results coming from the west still to come. This is Australia Votes from the tally room. As the result has really been called by most of our panellists here tonight, that Labor is simply not going to win enough seats to win government, seems an appropriate time to cross to Kim Beazley's own seat of Brand, the Labor leader, where Heather Ewart is standing by. Heather, is any of the sense that's come from this panel of tonight's outcome that Kim Beazley may well have picked up as many as 20 seats, but certainly not enough to get government? Has that sunk in over there? Is Kim Beazley himself accepting that?
Look, at the moment he's holed up in his electorate office with key advisors, basically watching all of you, and Bob McMullen in particular. And I think it's fair to say they're not exactly kicking up their heels here. They feel that the seats aren't there for a Labor victory on current trends. There's also a lot of disappointment about the high level of the One Nation vote. They feel that One Nation preferences remain crucial in a number of key marginal seats. We're all waiting here at the YMCA building in the electorate of Brand, where Kim Beazley is expected to turn up in the next hour or so. And of course the usual question marks are floating around about whether Labor could have done anything differently. Just before he went into the electorate office, his electorate office tonight, he did offer me this assessment at one of the polling booths about how he thought Labor's campaign had gone.
I think we've run a good campaign. I think we've had the right balance of a positive message to the Australian people on jobs, education and health, and at the same time carried the argument on the things the government is doing with which we do not agree.
Do you feel nervous?
Yeah, to a degree. You always do. It's eager anticipation. You don't know what's happening in your own seat. You don't know what's happening around the country. But I feel there's a drift to us. How much the drift is, we'll know much later tonight.
So did you wake up this morning and think, gee, maybe I am in there with a really good chance?
Yeah, I did. And then I got real and thought about the 27 seats,
so
which is pretty hard. But, and you know that the difference between winning, say, a dozen, 15 seats and winning 25 to 30 seats is probably in the overall national vote about 1 to 2%. And who could ever pick that on the doorstep?
Okay, Heather, and of course there are a couple of elements here. The curiosity, if you like, almost bizarre, that Labor could be looking at winning 20 seats in this election, but still feeling extremely disappointed. The other thing, of course, is we'll be looking forward to see how One Nation will poll in Kim Beazley's own seat, because we know that they were targeting him, and that seat is marginal. How is he feeling about that?
We don't really know at the moment, although I don't think there's been a major shift in general confidence that he's going to do okay in his own seat, certainly that he will win that seat. But as we've said earlier, you know, those preferences from One Nation really do matter. There's another quirky thing that's happened here tonight. We've just had word that in 4 of the marginal seats, the Liberal Party has been asked to withdraw, is told to withdraw its how to vote cards. The Labor Party lodged complaints with the Electoral Commission about those cards, and we don't quite know what that's going to turn up either. But certainly the results on Western Australia are fairly important here. Okay, well, we'll sweat on the prospect of Kim Beazley appearing, but it would be highly surprising if he did that before we had significant trends becoming clear in Western Australia as well as elsewhere in the country. Heather, thanks very much for that so far. Thanks, Kerry.
Okay, now one seat that we have not paid any attention to thus far, which we should take a look at, and that is the seat of Northern Territory, which neither side really felt confident about calling going into election day. We've got 31% of the vote counted, Anthony.
I was completely captivated by another figure. Look, what we're seeing there is Nick Dondas is ahead. This is a highly diverse electorate, and the count will only get up to about 50% in that electorate tonight because many of the people in the Northern Territory vote at mobile booths, which are not counted tonight. If you look at that in percentage terms, you see you've got a bit of a vote for One Nation, some Greens, some others, and if you factor in what booth is that's from and the mobiles, too close to call.
So it really will depend on what the story of One Nation's preferences are.
Yeah. Although, just as a quick thing, we haven't had a look at it, but in Fairfax there's an extraordinary result because it seems like One Nation preferences are just pouring to the Labor Party in Fairfax.
Can we get Fairfax up? Is that possible? Yes.
Well, I mean,
this is the one where where Ray Martin was used by the Liberals.
Well, let's look at the primary. Let's look at the percentages, and you'll see. It's a nightmare to call this sort of seat. The national votes will go to the Liberal Party, which will get them up to the high 30s. But we've got an actual preference count and a comparison of booths, which show Labor's not winning. I think we can we look at the after preferences figures. It's an astonishing swing of 16%. Now, the only way that can happen is if One Nation preferences are flowing something like 70% to the Labor Party. Now, Labor's not going to get up and win that seat, but that's a very... I mean, that's why I think this election is so hard to call at certain times, is what One Nation are doing their preferences seems to be so random.
Well, there's certainly...
One Nation's really splitting 50-50, I think, there. You've got... because the ALP's improved its primary vote by 4%. It looks to me more like a 50-50% split of preferences.
Well, I don't know,
But it's a very big One Nation
They've turned a 4% swing to them on primaries into 16% after preferences. So
let's take a look at another couple of seats further up the coast of Queensland. Wide Bay, that's one where in the state, the last state election, the One Nation did extremely well and ended up in the Parliament.
Well, we're not going to get a count from the electoral office on this one tonight. Warren Truss is, well, he's got 14,500, 13,300 for the Labor Party, 12,200 for One Nation. Let's look at it in preference terms because that's as far as we're going on that graphic because we can't take it through to a two-party preferred because we don't have one. But what you're seeing there is three parties between 26% and 31%. The Liberals will get the Nationals ahead of the Labor Party comfortably. And at that point, One Nation preferences, if they've drifted to Labor, no, that's going to get the National Party over the line.
Yeah.
But the electoral office tonight are counting that electorate in a rather strange manner, which I can't remember who it was between, but it's not going to be according to those primary vote figures.
Okay, now one seat that is of real interest, and that's the seat of Herbert, based around Townsville. Herbert, over time, has been more Labor than Liberal in the last, until the last election, 96, when it swung back from Ted Lindsay, who was then the ALP member, to Peter Lindsay, the Liberal, who holds it with 6.6%.
The battle of the Lindsays here, and we have a preference count in 23 of the 45 booths. Peter Lindsay is leading Ted Lindsay, and on those votes, while at this stage there's a 3% gap on the primaries, there's a lot of votes in preferences, and if you factor in the booths, it's just got Labor ahead, but it's far too close to call. And that might be one of those sorts of seats where we are watching on the postals and absence, because if there is a big pre-poll postal absent vote, it's a seat on 50.3 which might turn around.
Okay, Nick, have you got any gut feeling about that?
Well, I did expect Peter Lindsay to hold that seat, but you've got a One Nation vote of 14%. Those preferences clearly are not going as strongly our way as we'd like.
Yeah.
I mean, it is line ball, 50.3%. At this stage means it's really line ball. We're going to have to wait on that, so it's going to be doubtful for a while.
Yeah, Bob McMullen?
Well, yes, that's Ted Lindsay's getting a big flow of preferences there, and he thinks he's going to get over the line, but it's extremely close. There's a
He's
lot
an
of,
old campaigner.
That's right. He's a pretty shrewd judge, but nobody could call it tonight.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of seats in that category. I mean...
Again, the Labor are only in the race because of One Nation. They have not improved their primary vote at all. The only reason Labor looks like they could win Herbert is because of One Nation. One Nation is, potentially going to cost us that.
Well, that's a complicated argument for saying at the end of the day, more people want to vote for our candidate than theirs. That's the essence of why, if we win it, that's why we'll win it.
And if we can go from Queensland now to South Australia in the seat of Macon, which earlier in the night was actually showing a swing to the sitting Liberal member, Trish Draper. She's on a margin of 1.1%. You've got 60% of the vote counted, Anthony.
And we've got 15 of the 32 booths reporting two-party preferred vote. You can see the Liberals are ahead on primaries. There's a big vote for Democrats and One Nation. factoring in preferences, it's too close to call. Very close.
But you're expecting a strong Democrat flow to Chris Draper, weren't you, in that seat?
No, that was in Kingston.
Right.
But still, this is a phenomenal result. It does look like we can just hang on to this seat.
Yeah.
And that's extraordinary, given it was the most marginal seat in South Australia.
Okay, now another one that was a surprise seat in terms of a very large swing earlier to Labor is the seat of Hindmarsh, held by Chris Gallis with a margin of 8.1% before tonight.
And yes, well, she holds out with a margin of 8%. Chris, she's on 25,000 odd votes. Labor Party just under 25,000 votes. There's the percentages. Factor in the preferences and the two-party preferreds, close to call.
I think Postals would save Chris Gallis on that.
Yeah.
On that
I think, given look, if there's been a late swing at this election, there's a huge postal absent pre-poll, and if there has been a late swing, you'd expect on a result like that, it may favour the sitting member, and she has worked very hard in the electorate for a long time.
That's right. Still. We might throw to the ABC's political correspondent, Jim Middleton, who's on the floor of the tally room with Democrats aspirant in the ACT for the Senate, and that's Rick Farley. Jim?
Yes, Kerry, Rick Farley, the holder of an unusual double, former director of the National Farmers Federation and former member of the Native Title Tribunal, and now trying to knock off the Liberals, Liberal senator in the territory, Margaret Reid. Rick, how's it going at the moment?
Well, Jen, there's been about 14% of the vote counted. At this stage, Margaret Reid is below a quota on about 31 or just over. I'm approaching 17%, so it's going to be very tight, very close, and it's probably going to be, I'd say, a week or 10 days before we know the result.
But that, at 16.5% or 17%, is a little bit lower than you would have hoped to have been at this point to be competitive, isn't it?
Well, preferences are going to flow from the Labor Party and from the Greens, but yeah, I would have hoped to be up around 18, 19%. If I get to around 20%, then it would be looking fairly good.
Well, if the trend continues in this way, it would be, and you don't get there, it would be a bit of a disappointment, given it does now appear that the government has been returned, and the opportunity that you would have had to have had some influence in the Senate directly from the declaration of the poll may have disappeared.
Well, the seat in the Senate and the ACT is tremendously important because it's the one opportunity to be able to put a break on the Howard government between October and June next year. And frankly, I mean, it's one of the reasons that I've decided to stand and put my hand up for this seat. So, you know, it's critical, particularly seeing it looks as if the government's doing fairly well at the moment.
Now, John Howard would argue, and we heard Nick Minchin argue it for him a few minutes ago, that winning with a GST is a remarkable feat on its own, and we've heard the Prime Minister say on many occasions that this is a mandate and it deserves to be observed. Why is he wrong?
Well, the Prime Minister, of course, said something different in 1987 when he said the mandate theory of politics was nonsense. You know, I think the reality today is that people are voting differently in the Senate to their vote in the House, and you've only got to look at the Democrats' vote to see the truth of that. The Democrats are polling probably 3 times as high in the Senate as they are in the House. So I think that argues that a lot of people want the Senate to exercise its constitutional role as a state's house of review, and for it to be there to put some balance into highly polarised legislation that comes out of the House of Representatives.
Couldn't it also be argued, however, that what's actually made the Democrats relevant again was the emergence of One Nation, and you did campaign very strongly as a party to put the brake on One Nation rather than the government?
Well, we campaigned on a number of issues. One Nation, of course, was one of that, but the position that the Democrats took on inclusion of food, books, the tourism industry within the GST, I think also was a critical issue during the election. The reality is that it's only if the Democrats get the balance of power that the GST will be able to be made fairer, because at the moment the benefits very distinctly go to those at the top end of the income scale, at the disadvantage of those who are on low or fixed incomes.
Do you expect that whatever your individual fate here, the Democrats will be in a position to modify the government's taxation package in the Senate?
It depends on the timing of the legislation that comes forward. I'm absolutely confident that the Democrats will hold the balance of power after June next year, when the rest of the senators take their place. But what's critical, of course, is the period between October and June.
Rick Farley, thanks for talking to us very much. As I said, Rick Farley, the Democrats aspirant for the ACT, and facing a bit of an uphill battle if he is to toss the the Liberals' Margaret Reid.
And thanks for that, Jim. We might now take a look at the national trend graphic to give us an overview of the nation so far, but that's pretty much without Western Australia.
Well, we're seeing the Labor Party on the polling figure it had. We're seeing the Liberal and National Party on the less than they had, and the One Nation and others slightly higher than the polling figures indicated. We factor that into a two-party preferred vote, and you can see the Labor Party got over 51% of the two-party preferred vote. When you look at the change in vote between the different party shares, you're seeing the Labor Party vote just sort of creeping up, and most of the loss of the Liberal National Party vote seems to be going towards One Nation.
Okay, now if we break that down to state trends, what about Queensland? 62.5% of the vote counted there.
Well, we're seeing the Labor Party on 36.3, Liberals 30.4, Nationals 10. Let's again just look at the swing figure. It's translating into a two-party preferred swing of 7.5, but Labor's only getting 3.1 of that on a primary vote swing. Most of that swing is coming as preferences through One Nation.
Okay, what about New South Wales? 61% of the vote counted there.
Well, in New South Wales, we're seeing that sort of vote, and let's go through the percentage votes for each the swings by party. We're seeing Labor votes barely creeping up. Now, we're getting a 5% swing to them after preferences, but Labor's only picking up 2 seats on that 5% swing, and that's why the government is likely to get re-elected, is because the Labor Party has completely failed to win seats. At this stage, it looks like it's won Patterson and Lowe, and that's it.
And that of course, was always Labor's big fear, that New South Wales would not come good for them as some other states were appearing to do so.
It's going to raise a lot of questions for the party hierarchy in New South Wales. He's like John Curtin in 1940, who failed to win because Labor had divisions and problems and prevented him winning across the country.
Bob McMullen, in terms of looking at the failure in New South Wales to make any real inroads, to what extent is Bob Carr a factor?
Well, we have the perverse situation where in the state where the state government is polling well ahead of its opposition, in New South Wales, we don't seem to have made the gains, and yet in the state where the state government of South Australia is polling historically low, that doesn't seem to be flowing through. So I don't think you can say it's a state government factor, or the results would be the other way around. We'd be doing well in New South Wales and badly in South Australia. There's got to be some other explanation. I have to say, everybody can, but of course we're polling 52.5% in New South Wales. So you can't. We're actually getting the national swing in New South. You can't say we're performing badly in New South Wales. We're getting the national swing in New South Wales. The state in which we're not getting it is actually Victoria. It's not true to say we're not doing well in New South Wales.
Well, let's have a look at Victoria. 65% of the vote counted. Anthony, Victoria, pay attention.
Many things going on here. In Victoria, what we're seeing is 44.9% for the Labor Party, 36.7% for the Liberals, 2.9% for the Nationals. Again, it's easiest to look at some of these things in terms of share of vote. This is not what was reported to us by some of the people arriving this morning. We're talking about the Liberal Party taking a bath or maybe a cold shower in Victoria, it must be said, but it's only a 3.2% swing after preferences. I'm not sure whether we should have a look at the changing seats graphic, but I think we should get a handle on the seats we're perhaps giving away at this stage, and we're seeing a lot of seats being given away. We're seeing Labor gaining Macmillan, Kingston, Patterson, Chisholm, Griffith, Bowman, Lilly and Lowe. And we've got another page which comes in a moment, and that shows... I think I'll go in and change Wide Bay. Bendigo is a Labor game, Braddon is a Labor game, Capricornia, Rankin is notionally a Labor seat. Swan, that's very early figures. I think I'll override that one as well. Curtin, very early figures. Hume is shown as a Liberal gain, and there's one more page. We've got Blair as a Liberal gain. So we're seeing, we got a couple of rather random results in there from Western Australia, I think. I'll slightly discount them. But that's sort of showing Labor's winning seats, not enough seats for government.
Okay, well, we might actually throw to Maxine's panel because one of her panellists, John Sharp, might have a few observations about what's happening in his old seat of Hume.
Tell me about Albie Schultz, John.
Well, Albie's...
the hero of the hour.
Yeah, well, he is at the moment. He's been the state member in the seat of Burrinjuck, the state seat of Burrinjuck, which is wholly within the seat of Hume. And he's been the state member for 10 years. He's high profile. He's quite a popular member of Parliament, very active. His wife Gloria is very popular, probably even more popular than Albie in many ways, and so it's been very, very...
Why wasn't she pre-selected?
Well, you know, they used to campaign, Albie and Gloria Schultz.
There was a young woman...
Christine Ferguson
was the national candidate replacing you, wasn't she?
Yes, right. Christine Ferguson, an excellent candidate, but when you're up against somebody who's been a state member within the federal seat for as long as Albie has, big profile, quite popular, take a lot of local issues right through to the keeper, it's always going to be a hard battle, and I think for the National Party in the seat of Hume, this is, it doesn't reflect badly on the National Party so much, it just reflects on the fact that a popular state member has chosen to go to the federal parliament.
Now, in fact, elsewhere, the Nationals are holding up pretty well, aren't they? It's not a wipeout, as many predicted it would be for the Nationals tonight.
Well, they were predicting that this would be the end of the National Party. This would be the last shootout for the National Party. 3-4 months ago, we were finished. Now, we've come in, we've lost one seat to the Liberal Party. It looks tough for Paul Marrick in Capricornia, but the rest of it...
Actually, what do you think about Capricornia?
Well, it's going to be awfully hard for Paul Marrick. I mean, Paul's very positive and good on him, but you know, it's going to be very tough for Paul to come back from the position he's in now. He's probably the only person from the Conservative side of politics who could win Capricornia. I mean, Paul is a former Australian Workers' Union, or Metal Workers' Union, I should say, Vice President. He's been a miner, a fitter and turner. He's the sort of guy who could, amongst all of us, best win the seat of Capricornia, but it's a tough call for him, and I think he'd have to be really on his knees praying.
And I'm just seeing your leader coming into the tally room now. Kerry?
And the National Party leader, Tim Fischer, who, despite the threat of One Nation, is safe in the seat of Farrer.
Be fair enough, wouldn't it, Tim? Just a little bit more with but no further safety.
We're all going to be crushed.
Mr. Fischer, hang on, I just want to make a few comments. Okay. And then I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'll just wait till the other cameras get around and the others cross. Don McDonald is here somewhere too, if he can find his way in, he probably can't. At this stage of the count, a couple of things are absolutely clear. I have not rolled over or been rolled over to One Nation in the seat of Farrer. Neither has the National Party nationwide. In fact, yes, there's a lot of problems out there, and there's a genuine protest, and those genuine problems have got to be further addressed and fixed. But what is clear tonight is that the anti-trade racist element of One Nation has been rejected by the Australian people. 14 weeks ago, One Nation captured 11 seats in the Queensland State Parliament. Tonight, they're struggling to capture one seat in the House of Representatives federally. I say in all of this, it's been a lot of hard yards, but the National Party has stood up and repulsed this full frontal assault from One Nation. The Liberal Party has stood up and repulsed this full frontal assault from One Nation, and we've learnt a great deal in the process, and there will be changes, but in one sense, this is one of the finest hours for the National Party in its contribution to the body politic, the political fabric of Australia. I salute my Deputy John Anderson in a tough personal situation, great win, and all my colleagues and supporters right through the grassroots level. I thank them on a tremendous effort, especially the grassroots supporters who saw through the simplistic solutions that were being bandied around. I salute John Howard and Peter Costello and the team. It's been a hard 2.5 years in government, but in fact, we've delivered a great deal, including the balanced budget, and we await further counting. And the result, I would say one other thing, there's a lot of hurt out there. Throughout the whole decade of the 90s, it's been a very difficult decade for so much of Australia, so many Australians. Fixing that is going to take more than 2.5 years. We're on the way, and I won't be here all that long. I have to open the Berrigan Centenary Show at 12 noon tomorrow.
Fisher, are you saying that you are declaring victory for the coalition early?
No, it's a matter for the Prime Minister, but I am saying this. I'm declaring victory for the National Party over One Nation. We're holding already 11 seats and some. They are struggling to win one seat, and I have held Farrer against a full-on onslaught,
probably without any preferences required.
Mr. Fisher, when you say there's a protest...
Are going to decide a number of seats, wouldn't you agree?
Well, that may well be true, but I heard a prediction earlier today that One Nation was going to win 12 seats in the lower house and 6 in the Senate. That's not going to happen.
Mr. Fisher, does it relieve you that once again the National Party will be in a position where it's an integral part of the government in the sense that the Liberal Party would not be able to govern on its own?
Well, it certainly strengthens the ratios and the circumstance in that sense, but count's still going. But I'll remind everyone that twice now in the last 25 years, the Liberal Party has had that opportunity, and key leadership decisions by the Liberal Party taken by then Malcolm Fraser, now John Howard, has been to stay the course with the coalition, and that has paid dividends and will pay dividends again. It's the right way forward.
Fisher, when you say there are problems out there, does that extend to Telstra and to the GST?
Well, I'm not going into all the issues at this stage of account, but we've got to work through a lot more, and we have already the review of competition policy and the like, but by the same token, against the odds, a budget balanced against the odds, 2 record years of exports for Australia. The trade figures have been tremendous, up 8.2%, but a lot more work to be done.
The pork producers, the ALP, they seem to be doing extremely well, certainly in Queensland where there are a lot of regional seats.
Look, you've had in the last couple of months the advent of 2 new premiers, Labor Premier in Queensland and a Labor Premier in Tasmania. There's always a honeymoon period in that circumstance. That's created added difficulties for us, but there's been some superlative performances. And take New South Wales. We had 4 members retiring, sitting members, and that's always an awkward situation. But in New England, where the big shoes of Ian Sinclair have to be filled, in Parkes and also in Riverina, the National Party has had 3 clear-cut wins in those 3.
Are you disappointed, though, about Hume?
Yes, I am. But these things will always happen when state members put their hand up. I recall one state member putting his hand up in Farrer from the New South Wales State Parliament in 1984.
Well, and Mr. Fisher, will the National Party agree to the sale of Telstra beyond 49?
And Tim Fisher still talking there. I think it has to be said that probably no politician in this country has travelled as much as Tim Fisher to try and hold back the One Nation tide as he has done in the past few months. And to some degree, it would appear to have paid off.